Today on BoBeats, it's time for another versus video. I'm pitting the DIGITAKT versus the newer Polyend Play to see which one is right for you. But before we start today's video, we gotta get an obvious question out of the way. Why not both? Okay, kidding aside, why am I not comparing the Polyend Play to the Deluge? And why am I comparing it to the DIGITAKT? The Deluge and the Polyend Play might look similar, but they're actually nothing alike. And the DIGITAKT, while it looks totally different from the Polyend Play, and yeah, the workflow is different and I'll talk about it in today's video, the specs are very similar between these two devices. And here are some similarities. Both have 8 tracks that can play back mono samples. Both also have 8 MIDI tracks. They also have similar effect sections with, for example, delay and reverb sends and a few master effects. And most importantly, both are sample-based grooveboxes with clear limitations, as opposed to workstation types machines like Machina Plus, MPC-1, or even the Deluge. Those machines have built-in synth engines that can generate a vast range of sounds, whereas these machines are more limited and restricted in terms of what you can do, but that's sort of the joy with them also, that the limitations breed a lot of creativity. And by the way, if you want to support the channel, you can check the description for affiliate links for these two products and a few alternatives, so regardless of what you pick up, you support the channel, even if you just buy an audio cable. With that out of the way, let's compare the machines. Sequencer workflow. Here I feel that the Play wins in terms of ease of use, whereas the DIGITAKT wins in terms of depth. So it's basically a tie, and it depends a lot on your preference, so let me show you why. Understanding the workflow differences between two grooveboxes is probably the most important thing if you're looking to buy either device, so therefore I'm spending most time on this difference. First up, they're very similar. We have 8 tracks here for samples and 8 tracks here for samples on the DIGITAKT. Now, the way you load samples is also pretty similar. You have basically a sample pool. So that's samples that you've loaded from the 1 GB internal memory into RAM, and from the SD card into some sort of RAM on the Polyend. But in practice, not a big difference. So how do you make music on them? Well, on the DIGITAKT, we've selected a track here, and each track has a sample associated with it. So you select it from a list, then you enter the sequencer, and you put down steps. Bass. We'll get back to that demo shortly, but let me show you how it works on the Polyend Play. So here we select, for example, the kick folder. We put down some steps. So you can immediately spot the difference. Here we select the sample and place it, whereas on the DIGITAKT you've already selected the sample for the track, which means that we can take any sample we want, place it on the grid wherever we want. So we can have the open hi-hat on this track or on that track or over here. Let's find a bass. Let's find a clap. So you can place whatever sample you want wherever you want on the grid. Now the grid here is 16 steps, and this here represents 16 steps on the DIGITAKT. You can make up to 64 steps long sequences. But let's get back to the samples. So you can put down whatever sample you want wherever you want here on the grid. So you can have multiple different kinds of samples on the same track on the Polyend Play. So let me show you. So we have, for example, the clap here. If I want to, I could just go and select a percussive sound, and I can put it here. Select another one, stick sound. But you can do something similar on the DIGITAKT. Here we have the kick track. Let's mute all the others so it's easier to hear. The kick, let's go in. Now we can put down a step like here, for example, and we can select another sound, say a hi-hat sound. We can copy it very easily. We can introduce the other sounds. So just a very simple example, you can build some pretty crazy beats just using one track on each of these devices. It's slightly more snappy and slightly better on the DIGITAKT because you have a bit more control over your sound with the DIGITAKT because of the screen, because of the available number of sound shaping parameters, but I'll get into that later. Next up, let's add some effects. So on the Polyend Play, I want to add some reverb to this track here. Just select the entire track, increase the reverb. But I don't have to do it like that. I could, for example, just select an individual sample, for example, these hi-hats here, and increase the reverb send. You also get a little preview. Control Shift, I can select these more percussive noises, and I could add some delay. And in the same way, we can select a few of these sounds here, and we can change, for example, the filter, cutoff, adding some resonance if we want to, adding some overdrive, changing the bit rate. Maybe we should add something to the bass line, adding a little bit of reverb to the first one, a little bit of delay, maybe some filter, maybe some overdrive, lowering the volume a bit. Oh, and also let's do some panning to these steps here. And let's listen. I'm gonna copy this step here. This is the bass. I'm gonna change the note. So that's pretty cool. How do you do it on the DIGITAKT? Well, we have the clap here, and just like on the Play, we can increase the reverb. Increasing the reverb for the entire track. But just like on the Polyend Play, we can go into the sequencer and select individual steps and changing, for example, the filter per step, changing the reverb, so adding a bit of reverb to certain steps, a bit of delay to certain steps. We can take this pad sound, and here's a big difference. And I said that the Play is more immediate and the DIGITAKT has more depth. You can, for example, see the entire waveform. This is something you can't do on the Polyend Play. We can set the start. We can set the play mode of the sample, so it loops. So on both devices, we can have different samples on different steps, and we can make parameter adjustments per steps and lock it to that step. But on the DIGITAKT, we do have something that you don't really have on the Polyend Play, and that's the LFO. So we have this sample here, and I'm gonna assign an LFO here to the frequency of the filter. We can make it slower. There's different waveforms. So there's even 2 LFOs per track, so we can set the other one here to, for example, the speed of the first LFO. So you can even hear that there's a speed difference here. So that's something we don't have on the Polyend Play, but instead on the Polyend Play we have chance, which is basically a random or a percentage chance that something happens. For example, if we take, I don't know, a hi-hat sound. So we have this closed hi-hat, and let's put it down on all these steps here. And we can take the chance here, and we can change the chance of the step playing to 50%, or random sample. Pretty cool. Random note. This I really like. But there's not just chance, there's also randomize. So randomize is applied to the sequence. Chance, you have one chance setting per track. Randomize, you can set up. And here we have different types of randomization. So we have sampling folder, playing basically different hi-hat sounds based on a percentage. So you can listen. Different samples from the entire pool of samples. Pretty crazy. Different sample length, different texture, different octaves, different level. So we can apply different level here per step. And then we can add space. So that's pretty cool. So yet again, it's very available, whereas you can do more fine granular changes to the sequence on the DIGITAKT. In terms of song mode, there's not really any advanced song modes on either device. On the DIGITAKT, you can set up pattern chains, and on the Play, you can plot out different patterns here and have them played back. And it's a little bit more advanced on the Play, but it's still not what I would call like an advanced song mode. So you can basically make basic arrangements on both. And the last sequencer related thing I want to talk about is the generative aspects. While you can do some randomization stuff, for example, randomizations of parameters on the DIGITAKT, you can, for example, go to the filter page, hit filter and yes to randomize that page. While you can randomize, for example, parameters on the DIGITAKT, the Play is much more intentional. And here's just a quick example of me using the fill function to create a little beat. So let's start with the kick here, acoustic, fill, let's see here, acoustic 1 maybe. And obviously these sounds are not very acoustic, but let's go with it, okay. Indulge me. Oh, sorry, let's go. Hi-hats, fill, and we can change the length here. And we can record some parameter changes. Let's select this bass here, this track, and we do random. And we can do random sampling folder. So it really is quick, whereas on the DIGITAKT for programming stuff you have to actually select the track, enter it, program your steps. Not a lot of randomization or things that can generate ideas on the fly. So ultimately this is faster, more immediate, and the DIGITAKT is a bit deeper, and I'll show you more about this in the next section where I'll be talking about sound design. Next up, I want to compare these devices in terms of sound design, and in this category it's not a tie. The DIGITAKT easily wins this one. It has multiple different filter types, also 2 filters per track. It has a full filter envelope, for example, full amp envelope, and you can create your own synth sounds on it using samples as oscillators. So overall, a better sound design machine, and here's a few examples. So I want to take this kick drum here, but I want to turn it into a synth sound, and this is something which opens up the device a lot. So you turn down the sample end, and then you loop the sample. we can use the amp envelope to control the sound. Make it plucky. Drawn out if we want to. We can add some reverb. And here's a massive sound design difference as well. On the Play, you basically only have presets for the delay and reverb, but on the DIGITAKT we can actually go in here in the reverb settings and we can change the reverb. For example, changing the decay time of the reverb if we want to. We can add some delay. Let's make it more plucky again. We then have the filter and a filter envelope. But it goes beyond that. In addition to the filter envelope and the amp envelope and the different filter types that I mentioned, we also have multiple LFOs. So we have 2 LFOs per track. So we could set up, for example, one LFO here to control, say, the resonance of the filter. We can add some overdrive. We can add some bit reduction. The Play also has bit reduction. So the LFO basically has a ton of different destinations that you can set it to. For example, panning. We can set it to a pretty slow LFO that controls the panning. So I think that making a synth sound on the DIGITAKT shows you that it can go well beyond just a basic sample-based groovebox. You can do some pretty cool stuff with it. And here's an example of that where I've taken a MIDI keyboard, connected it to the DIGITAKT. I'm using it to control the parameters of the DIGITAKT, and I have a pattern running, and then I'm just changing it up, taking it from a standard beat into something completely different by just changing the parameters. In the sound design department, there's a lot of things in favor of the DIGITAKT. So if you're looking for a device for sound design, I think this one is far better than the Polyend Play. But that being said, while the Polyend Play isn't as strong in terms of sound design, I think it's very strong in terms of changing up patterns on a more macro level. So what do I mean by that? If I have a basic pattern like this, I can, for example, very quickly create polyrhythms. I can even change how the pattern is being played. So, reversing a few tracks. Adding reverb to the entire track. Or just selecting individual samples like this. adding, say, delay to them. I can also very quickly select an entire track, copy it, paste it, randomize sample in folder, changing the volume, live recording some panning, for example. I could select the hi-hat tracks, for example, and quickly use chance to play a random note, say, I don't know, 50% of the time. Select all of the tracks, hit save, so I've saved the state, and then just use tuning, changing it up, adding overdrive, changing the bit reduction, adding repeats, let's add a bass. So we started here and we ended up here. So the sound design on a micro level is much better on the Digitakt, but on a macro level, in terms of using the sequencer to create varied and interesting things and changes to a pattern, yeah, the sequencer can just take you wild places because it's so immediate and fun. But that being said, the play still heavily relies on the samples that you load into it. Whereas on the Digitakt, you can sample into it, you can change up the samples more, tweak them more, do more crazy, wild things. Next up, let's talk sampling. Here, the Digitakt wins yet again because, well, the play can't sample. There's not much to say about that. Do I miss being able to sample on the Polyend Play? Well, not really. The device works fine without it. And the Digitakt samples in mono also, which is a limitation. So yeah, this is of course depending on what you need. If you need sampling, it got it. This one doesn't, but I don't miss it. And while we are talking sampling, none of these devices have time stretching. So if that's something you want, you have to look at, say, Maschine Plus or MPC-1, for example. Let's talk I/O, and here it's another win for the Digitakt. You have the left and right output, you have a dedicated headphones output, input left and right, MIDI, 3 full-sized MIDI connections, so you can actually hook it up to 2 different synths, for example, at the same time if you want to sequence them using the MIDI tracks. Whereas on the Polyend Play you have this mini jack for stereo out or headphones, and the 2 mini jacks for MIDI. You get, I think, 1 dongle, so you can convert it to DIN MIDI with the unit, but then you have to buy a second one, I do think, if you want to use both of them. And you of course have USB on both, but on the Digitakt you can actually use the USB to multi-track audio, so you can record each track as individual audio tracks into the computer. And on the Polyend Play, you don't have any such functionality. You only have the stereo out, and that's it. And it's one of the biggest drawbacks on the Polyend Play, and something that I talk about extensively in my review of it. Can you make a full song on both of these devices? And the answer is yes. So it's a tie. Both can be used to make a full song, and they share similar weaknesses. One such weakness is that both uses mono samples. And even if you add stereo effects to the mono samples, certain things such as pads and keys and so on will just not sound as full and as vibrant as they will if you're using a stereo sampler. They also share a limitation in that it's a bit tedious to create chord sequences and melodies on a step sequencer. Like, it's totally doable, I do it a lot of the time, but just know, especially if you're new to electronic music, that creating like a longer melodic sequence on a step sequencer like this, with like fixed steps, where you can move stuff around, you can do micro adjustments to each step that you place down, each sound that you place down, you can do micro adjustments to the sound, even though you can, and even though you can live record into, it's just quite tedious to create longer melodic elements or chord progressions, for example. Next up, let's talk menu diving. It's something that a lot of you really don't like, and here the Polyend Play wins for sure. There's a lot less menu diving on the Polyend Play versus the Digitakt. While the DIGITAKT is fast to use, especially for somebody like me who have used it for years, it's super quick to use. It still requires you to learn where things are located within the menus, and sure, they're often just one level or two levels deep, so you're not diving like super deep in terms of menus, but you still need to learn where they are, whereas the Play here has a much more intuitive and immediate UI. Next up, let's talk performance effects, and here it's quite simple. The Play wins, because the DIGITAKT doesn't really have that much in terms of performance effects, where the Polyend Play has an entire layer dedicated to it. So if you've seen any reviews of the Polyend Play, you know how this works. Basically just go into the performance mode here, and you select the tracks that you want to affect, and off you go. And it's that simple, and you can combine the different performance effects. Whereas on the DIGITAKT, you basically don't have a lot that you can do in terms of effects on the fly. The one thing that you can do is using the Control All feature. So here's a little simple demo of that. Basically, you hold down track, you turn the knobs, and you're affecting all the tracks at once. Basically, the Control All feature is a little bit of a roundabout way of doing things. It's not really a performance effect, but you can use it that way. But the Polyend Play definitely wins in this category. Next up, let's talk polyphony, and this one goes to the Polyend Play. You can, for example, use multiple tracks to create chords very easily, or record chords into the device, or melodies with overlapping notes and so on. This goes for both the MIDI side and the sample side. But in the MIDI side, if we take a look here, you also have something which I forgot to mention in my review, which is actually pretty substantial. You have chords. So we can actually put down chords in the MIDI side for each step. Whereas on the DIGITAKT side of things, if we select a MIDI track, you can put down up to 4-note chords. It's a little tedious to program, and you can record polyphonically into the sequencer as well. I think that's actually the better way to do it, but it's just not as good as on the Polyend Play, I think. In terms of MIDI sequencing, this one goes to the Polyend Play. Both devices can set up custom CCs for controlling external gear, but the Play offers a lot more, and Polyend has promised even more MIDI track features in the future. And there's cool stuff like using different play modes, just like I talked about for the sampling side, and randomization, and there's the chord function that I talked about. Whereas on the DIGITAKT, you do have a MIDI LFO. You can set up different CC values here per track that you can use to control an external synth, for example. But I still think that as a MIDI sequencer, the Polyend Play is a lot more fun. The DIGITAKT has one secret weapon though, and that is that its MIDI sequencer can actually send program change messages. What does this mean? Well, it means that if your synth can switch very quickly between presets using the program change messages, you can make some really wild sequences. Now this is just a secret weapon and not something that I think a lot of you will use, but I thought I'd mention it. Let's talk portability, and in this case, the Polyend Play easily wins. The size, the weight, it can be powered over USB, is what makes it really fun and portable. Sure, the DIGITAKT isn't big, but if I want to travel with it, I usually put it in a quite large case. I might need the power brick, or I need to use one of those MyVolts power converter things to use USB power, which works, not a problem, but it just feels less portable. Also, the Play runs forever on one of those external batteries, as long as it's a big one. So super portable. This one goes to the Polyend Play. With this all being said, this is what the score looks like right now. But there's one important question that we have to ask ourselves, and that is, which one is the better instrument? And as of making this video, I still think that the DIGITAKT is the slightly better instrument. And hear me out, if you're a Polyend Play fan, hear me out, I'm gonna explain. I think that the DIGITAKT is a better instrument for one simple reason, and that is that it's very bug-free. Of course, it's an older device, so they've had more time with the firmware, but overall, it just has a smooth workflow, there's very rarely any hiccups, and it has a steeper learning curve, sure, but it's just a very smooth experience, fewer bugs. Whereas the Play can absolutely rival the DIGITAKT in time, but it still has quite a bit of bugs, and there's things that needs to be refined and stuff that is a little unfinished. For example, there's no performance effects for the MIDI side. They say that that's coming, but we haven't seen it yet. So there are things that are unfinished. But in time, I think that the Play can easily rival the DIGITAKT and become like a future classic even, because it's very, very unique. And it just needs enough care and love over time. And if you want even more details on the limitations and the stuff that I think it needs to have improved, check my full review. But yeah, that's what I think so far, and you are free to disagree with me. So that was today's comparison video, and you be sure to let us all know which one is right for you, or maybe neither. And also let me know if you think it was a fair comparison, if there was something I missed. Be sure to put a comment down in the comment section. I try to read them all. I might not always agree with you, but your input is valuable to me and to the community. So put a comment down below. Talk to you later.